those that are actually tuned in with us today, the voice that you are hearing is Swati Narayan from Daya Houston, and I'm going to let her take this opportunity to introduce herself, and then we'll begin with the show. So please tell us about you.
Well, hi Sasha, thank you. I know we've been talking about the weather, but yes, so I'm Swati Narayan. I am a native Houstonian, and I work at Daya as their AAP Director of Community Safety and Belonging. My role is funded by the Asian American Foundation, which came to existence during the pandemic, and they had newly invested in Texas, and I have been am leading the role here to work with the AAPI community on issues of community safety, anti-violence, and anti-hate.
Love that. So you're a fellow Houstonian.
I'm a native Houstonian. I have, it's funny because I'm like looking out the window here. For those of you who aren't here, there is like wall-to-wall windows all around, and you can see, you have like almost a 360 view of Houston, and just to see the changes in the city in the last, I'm going to age myself, 5 decades. I mean, it's amazing. It has changed so much.
It has. It definitely has. I mean, I grew up in A-Leaf, so yeah, definitely has made some major changes.
Yeah.
So today we are going to be talking about domestic violence and gun violence. Domestic violence, including intimate partner violence, is a public health crisis in the U.S. Nearly 1 in 4 and 1 in 7 men will experience severe physical violence at the hands of their intimate partner in their lifetime. Wow. Some victims of domestic violence survive, but far too many do not. Firearms contribute significantly to domestic violence in the U.S. to threaten, to coerce, to control, and to kill. Let's delve a little bit deeper into this uniquely American issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Heavy topic for such a beautiful day.
It really is a heavy topic, but I feel like this is something that the more we talk about, it's still not enough.
Oh, it's never enough. And I've got my notes here because there is so much data there and so many statistics, and I think it's important to actually look at the numbers, and then also remembering that behind every number is an individual, right?
Yes.
There's a whole, family behind that individual.
That's so deep.
And friends, right? And so I think that's also really important. So you might hear me shuffling back and forth, but that's just because I want to make sure I get it right for you. But yeah.
Okay, so who is affected by domestic violence and intimate partner abuse?
So anyone can be a victim. Doesn't matter what their age, sex, race, culture, religion, education, employment status, marital status, dating. Anyone can be a victim, binary, non-binary. And overwhelmingly, you see within domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and it can occur in any relationship. However, the overwhelming global burden of IPVs endured by women, and the most common perpetrators are men. And children are often caught in the middle, and they're considered sort of the invisible victims of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. It's so pervasive, in terms of the people who are involved or who can be involved. So there really is there's no barrier to somebody being a victim.
Wow. So what are the risks posed when guns are present in the context of domestic or intimate partner abuse?
Well, so before we get to the guns, let's talk about some of the different types of domestic abuse,
please.
Right? Or domestic violence, I should say. So there's 5 main types of domestic violence that have been identified. They are physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, stalking, and financial. So, anytime any one of these any one of these are used to coerce or control or force another individual into, submission, it is considered abuse, right? And so, oftentimes, you'll see like financial abuse, withholding of money, to control somebody, emotional blackmail, guilt tripping, gaslighting, all of that, can be considered, signs of abuse. And so then you were asking about firearms, right?
Yes.
So, well, let me read this stat to you real quickly. So talking about the abuse and the types of abuse, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. Whoa. So just let that sink in. 20 people per minute. And during 1 year, this equates to more than 10 million men and women. And 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men, as you read at the beginning, have experienced some form of physical violence. On a typical day, there are more than 20,000 phone calls placed to domestic violence hotlines nationwide. And those are just phone calls that are made. We know that there's so many victims who suffer in silence and don't ever pick up the phone and call. And this is particularly gripping. In surveys and studies, 1 in 10 high school students report experiencing physical abuse in their relationships, and over 43% of college students report, incidents of physical abuse. So it is extremely pervasive. So when you take how commonplace it almost seems, and then you add guns into the mix, it's almost a lethal combination, right? It's just the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. 500%. And when guns are involved, it exacerbates harm, not only fatal for victims, but perpetrators, third parties, law enforcement when they arrive at the scene. And get this, nearly 1 million women report being shot, and 4.5 million women report being threatened by a gun at some point during their lives by an intimate partner.
Wow. Those are some crazy numbers.
It's crazy. And I'll just tell you, in Houston this past year, this is just in Houston, and the greater Houston community, right? So not necessarily South Asian or anything like that. This past year, over 18% of all homicides were from domestic violence, and 75% of those were by firearm.
Wow.
So when permitless carry became law in September of 2021, domestic violence murders in Houston increased by 60%. I mean, it's staggering.
Yes.
It's staggering when you see and hear the numbers, right? And like I was telling you, behind every number is a person who had a history, a person who had loved ones and friends and family, and that's the ripple effect, right? Yeah. People are left to sort of pick up the pieces, and then when you add guns to the mix, like I said, it's almost always a lethal combination.
I just wish there was ways where we can, go to the schools, educate the kids, signs to look for if they're ever in harm, what to do. It's very easy to sit here and say all these things like, oh, a lot of people make the comments where you should have known better, but unless and until you're in that situation, you just don't know what the person is going through, so you can't. From the outside, it's very hard to, just make those judgments, right? Like, it's very easy to make those judgments.
It absolutely is. And in fact, it's exactly what you were saying. Like, nobody knows what that person is going through. And, and I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but, when you have guns in the mix, or just the fear that somebody feels, like they may want to leave. Yeah. But sometimes there is there's a concern that are things going to exacerbate if I do, and more often than not, a lot of times these, I think 3/4 of these homicides occur when the victim does leave. So there's a lot of courage any which way for the person, a lot of courage that is being displayed by the victim any which way, whatever they choose to do. Now obviously we all want people to live a life free of harm, live a life of safety, live a life of dignity, and that's why safety planning is just so important, right? You know, when you contemplate fleeing an abusive situation.
But there's so many other factors too, right? Financial. Am I going to be able to handle if there's kids involved? Oh, what's going to happen to my child? Custody issues, legal issues. There's so many different factors that go into this.
So many.
We don't even realize. It's just not just picking up and going, right?
There's a lot of privilege in saying, well, just pick up your stuff and leave.
It's not that easy.
It's not that easy. It really isn't. And you know, and the thing is that you know, as we talk about this, domestic violence, domestic abuse doesn't discriminate. Like I said, you know, anybody can be a victim, and including different people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, right? It's not relegated. I mean, it's often a myth when people say, oh, it might happen in, you know, underserved or communities where, you know, people may be lacking. It can happen anywhere. It doesn't matter how wealthy you are or not. You know, there's no sort of recipe for who will be the victim.
Totally agree. And like I said, I just wish there was more education provided to the kids to look for the signs, especially when now they're the ones that are in high school going into college, and they have to be prepared for all these.
They have to be prepared. And so, you know, talking about looking for signs, Thea does, you know, my colleague Tisha, who's been here so many times, right?
Yes, we love her.
She does an amazing workshop on healthy relationships and what healthy relationships look like. So, you know, it's not only just knowing the telltale signs of what potential abuse could be, but also knowing what a healthy relationship should look like, right? And so, because ultimately that's what we want for, for our kids, for our friends, for our family members, right?
Absolutely.
To have these healthy relationships. And so, I mean, you know, if you're ever in, if you ever want any sort of workshop or training on healthy relationships, you can always reach out to Thea, and we would be happy to, to put together a workshop or
maybe we could do a show on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Tisha's great.
Yeah. So, what are legal options for victims of domestic violence in terms of obtaining protection orders?
Yeah, so, there are three main types of protective orders available. There's like the temporary, permanent, and emergency. And they can be issued through district attorney's office and or judges, depending on whether it's civil, criminal. There are so many nuances to those protective orders. So it really is best to reach out to somebody for legal advice, when wanting to know the differences between the different types of orders. However, if somebody is experiencing harm or abuse and wants to file a police report or wants to be able to at least file for some sort of a protective order, again, you can reach out to Thea and we will kind of walk you through that process of trying to file a report for a protective order. And we'll actually go with you and help with translation services as well.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then under current federal law, can individuals with history of domestic violence buy or possess guns?
So, federal law prohibits people convicted of misdemeanor domestic abuse from having guns, but you also need a separate state prohibition to make sure that that's the case. And under Texas law, that is the case if you're named in any of those orders that I had mentioned earlier. It used to be that those restrictions on possessing or purchasing firearms were only extended to marital partners. However, last year when Congress signed that bipartisan gun legislation, Bipartisan Community Safeties Act, or Safer Communities Act in 2022, they extended that to dating partners as well, who have been convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor domestic abuse charge. The key word here is convicted. And I say that because there is a case, the U.S. versus Rahimi case.
Yes.
So it was heard at the Supreme Court earlier in November, and it could potentially shake up some of these laws as we see them. So there was this person in Texas. His first name started with a Z. I'm forgetting it. His last name was Rahimi. Rahimi. And so he was a drug dealer. I want to say Zaki. I think his name is Zaki Rahimi. He was a drug dealer. He had assaulted I think it was his girlfriend or his partner, with a firearm. So she went to get a protective order against him. And then later when the police went to or law enforcement went to his, then what had happened was later on I think it was that same week, he shot off a firearm a couple of times in the air. I think he had an assault rifle as well. I mean, there was multiple incidents of using a firearm, and I think he had assaulted another person as well. And so when they went to take away his firearms, he pled, because he had a protective order. He said that he did. He pled guilty to having a firearm. But then he later argued that taking away his firearms was a violation of his Second Amendment rights. And so that is a case that is currently in the Supreme Court. It was heard on November 7th, and they're going to determine whether or not someone who has a protective order, whether or not they should or shouldn't be able to purchase or possess a firearm.
This should be such a clear-cut case. It just should be no. But I mean, it makes no sense.
Yeah, I don't have a legal background.
Yeah.
It absolutely, you can see how survivors of abuse could really be harmed by this.
Yeah.
If there's a protective order, obviously there is some fear and grounds for fear. So allowing a person who is under a protective order to have a firearm, it like you said, there's some dissonance there, definitely. But we'll see. I mean, the Supreme Court will render its verdict in a couple of months, and we're hoping that they don't change current laws.
Yeah. Wow.
I know it's scary. It's scary to think.
It is.
Of where we are,
Yeah.
In terms of safety and gun rights.
Yeah. Well, hold that thought real quick. We're going to take a really quick break. You are listening to 103.5 Hum FM with your Chai Time Girls. We will be right back in this short break. Welcome back to Chai Time here on 103.5 Hum FM. For those of you that have just tuned in, we are in conversation with Swati from Daya, and we are talking about domestic violence and gun violence. So, while we were on break, you were talking about some of the gaps in the law.
Yeah, so I know we were just talking about the Rahimi case, but then there are also a few gaps that do exist that that allow people to be able to purchase guns. And one of the big ones is a private gun show or buying from a private seller. You don't have to go through background checks in order to.
I did not know this.
Yeah, so if you go to a licensed firearm retailer, they do have to do background checks.
Yeah.
But if you go to a private seller or a gun show,
you don't
have to. And so they would have no way of knowing, right? And so that's one of the ways,
wow.
that people are able to kind of bypass. It's when you kind of look at gun laws, and then you look at public safety and community safety, there has to be a balance, right? And so that's kind of where we find ourselves right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what does gun violence and domestic violence look like in AAPI communities?
Yeah. So when I was talking about the stats earlier, I was kind of talking sort of everybody in general in the U.S., right? So nearly half of all women who are murdered in the U.S. are killed by a current or a former intimate partner. Every year in Texas, about 1 million women are victims of domestic violence. 55 to 68% of AAPI women have experienced some form of domestic violence. And I had stats, I couldn't pinpoint them right before I came, on the number of AAPI women who are killed by firearm. Of course, a few weeks ago, there was an Indo-Caribbean woman who was here in the Houston area in Katy, who was fleeing her abusive situation, and her estranged husband shot her and killed her, as well as stabbed her sister, and so I mean it exists in our communities. We are not immune or siloed from the general population. Any issue that is an American issue is also an AAPI issue, right? And so, so we know. And just, sort of anecdotally, we also know from people who call in our helpline, I mean, there is gun ownership among, the South Asian AAPI community. It's not like we don't own guns either. Right. So there is an intersection. One of the issues also is that when it comes to things like, our communities don't often reach out for help, or they don't often make that phone call. And so we do have a gap in numbers. But we know it exists. I mean, we see it.
It's sad, and I feel like I wish I could just shake every person and be like, if these things are happening, it's okay. Just pick up the phone, help them out. Don't shrug everything under the rug. This is just why, like, it always upsets me so much when I hear stories like this, and we talk about this so much, and I feel like we could do so much better for these people that are going through this, and yet we just put everything under the rug and just move around about our day like nothing is happening.
Yeah,
it's not okay.
It's not. It's totally not okay. And it, just the fact that there, for whatever reason, talking about issues like abuse or fear or just just even generally being unhappy. We started off our conversation today by
Such a
how
positive
happy we feel, right?
Yes.
Like, oh, the sun is out, how happy we feel. How often will we start off a conversation by, oh, it's so cloudy and gloomy? I feel really blasé.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to normalize conversations
Yes.
about how we feel, because it takes the stigma away.
Yeah.
And until we do that, there's so many people who are going to be suffering in silence, and there's no need for that. Like you said, there is no need for that. So
And there's so many different resources that are available. I mean, Gaia, for one, is one of them. And you guys are such a great organization that are there to hold your hand and be like,
absolutely.
you know what, let's walk with you.
Right, absolutely. I mean, there's absolutely no reason anybody should be suffering in silence at all. And that's what we want, right? We want everybody to live a healthy, happy, life,
Full
devoid
life.
of fear. Right,
Yes.
right. Nobody should have that fear of force, oppression, control, sort of hanging over them.
I can't even imagine.
No, I mean, so a big part of it is recognizing that, okay, this may be happening to me, or this may be happening to a friend that I know of. This may be happening to a coworker. I see signs. I see somebody who seems to be withdrawn. I see, and sometimes there aren't signs, right? But in conversation, you can pick up cues, and I don't know, listening with an empathetic heart is just so important.
Yeah. And sometimes that person just needs a friend to hear them out, to listen to them and help them. Maybe they're too afraid or embarrassed to even come out and say, hey, I need help. But if you see it, be that person, be that confidant,
be that light, right?
Yes.
Be that,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It's really not a big ask to just be human, and to just want the same thing that you want for yourself or others.
So, are there any specific risk factors for domestic violence incidents involving firearms?
There's no one typical detectable personality of an abuser. Some of them have some common characteristics that you sometimes see across the board. Oftentimes they'll minimize how serious the issue is, or they'll say, oh no, that's not domestic violence, or that's not abuse, and they'll kind of do that over and over again. They might objectify the victim, or see them as property. Sometimes an abuser may lack or may have low self-esteem, even though he or she may visibly seem like they know what they're doing, or they're in charge, or but internally there may be sort of this self-esteem, feeling inadequate. A lot of times they'll externalize the cause to like stress or alcohol, or like, oh, that wasn't really me, but those things may all be a factor, but they are never the reason, right? And so those are sort of maybe some of the characteristics, but the biggest risk factor is the presence of a firearm. Like I said, I mean, the incidence of a homicide, a murder, a fatality increases by 500% just by the presence of a firearm in the home. And when I say in the home, I don't necessarily mean in the house. I mean, just the presence of a firearm, because many people have them in a car. Many people carry them with them.
Yeah.
So the presence of a firearm, just, like I said, 60% increase in Houston. That is just in our little city here, big city. 60% increase since 2021.
That is crazy.
And that's just because permitless carry sort of came into law, and you can see the correlation between the presence of a gun and a fatality.
Holy. Okay. How can someone safely leave an abusive relationship?
Yeah, I know. We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
It's never easy to leave. Like, you were talking about, well, people shouldn't, have judgment, like, why didn't he leave or why didn't she leave? It's never as easy as it might seem on the outside.
Right.
There could be, psychological, financial, physical control, that's going on. But once, you sort of have decided that the alternative is better. The alternative, that you need to leave, that someone needs to leave. The best thing to do is to call an organization like THEA, where our advocates are equipped to be able to provide, safety planning, for those clients, because there's so much to consider, where to go, like you were talking about housing, transportation, school, workplace sort of precautions and things like that. So
especially, I feel more for those that have just moved into this country, don't speak the language, do not have an education, have no work skills. What happens to them?
Yeah,
they're more abused, right? Because they're like, well, where are you going to
go? But there is recourse.
Yes,
there are recourses,
of course.
Right? So they may not know it. That's the thing.
Yes.
They may feel like, oh, this is a hopeless situation. What am I going to do? I don't know anybody. I don't know where to go. But there are places you can go. There are avenues, and that's why we're here, right?
Yes.
To be able to help them, through that. Is it easy? Nothing. It's not easy, but it is. There are ways. There are ways to be able to flee safely.
Yes.
And start to that process of healing from that abuse and being able to put one foot forward and leading a life of safety and dignity but it starts with making that call.
Yeah, that's the first step.
For sure. So, and I think one of the things that is also important to understand in this, just like staying in an abusive situation, victims have many reasons for why they stay. But even when they leave, sort of managing those expectations of what it's going to be like, how freedom and independence is going to look step by step. That's a really important, crucial element to having advocates like THEA, sort of on your side.
Yeah. So, what are some common myths about domestic violence?
So, that it's the victim's fault, right? I think that's probably one of the first ones that you often hear. Oh, they played a role in the abuse, especially in some of these culturally different communities,
yes.
Right? You sort of hear, oh, he did something or she did something that caused it. And
yes.
I say caused in air quotes. Nobody causes. It's not the victim's fault. It's never the victim's fault. That is such a misperception. I mean, the reality is that no matter what, there is nothing the victim has done to invite abuse. just because a perpetrator might be charming and charismatic on the exterior doesn't mean that he or she isn't controlling or manipulative,
Yeah.
In private, right? So, so I mean, that's one of them. Oftentimes we'll hear things like, "Oh, it's just a slap," like in kuch nahi hoga,
Yeah.
it's just, but it can lead to so much worse, right? It's never just a slap,
It's not
right? And it can definitely, exacerbate and turn into, a very lethal sort of situation. We talked about the different forms of abuse. Some people think that abuse has to be physical in order for it to be abuse, but that's not true. Like we talked about the emotional, psychological, financial.
Yeah.
Anytime force, control, coercion is involved, preventing you from, beating you, psychologically, emotionally, sort of beating you down and preventing you from, being able to live fully and safely. That's abuse. And again, like, oh, it wasn't, he's not like that, she's not like that, that person was drinking, that person was under the influence. Again, that's not, those are all myths. Once it happens, and staying in a relationship, I can help this person, heal. I can help this person. That may not necessarily be the case. I'm not saying that you should leave permanently or that somebody can't rehabilitate. But if an abuser has a problem, you as a victim aren't going to be able to help that abuser heal from, that problem.
Yeah.
Right?
I always wonder what makes the abuser become an abuser.
Oh my God, there can be so many things, right? It can be, it's a cycle many times, right?
That is it like a learned behavior?
Yeah, I mean, that is,
From
what
childhood?
he or she may have seen, growing up, whether it's in their own homes, whether it's, something picked up from the environment, but those things sort of embed in their psyche, right? And poor communication skills, anger management, skills, and like I said, there are workshops to sort of kind of see what some of those red flags are. Controlling behaviors can, quickly escalate into aggression. So yeah.
I always wonder about that. Maybe one day look into the mind of an abuser and see what really ticks them, like what makes them do the things that they do.
And it is important to kind of understand that so that you can break that cycle. So again, part of what we also like to do at the through our community outreach is to talk to young people about red flags and healthy relationships, and the red flags not just for people to sort of recognize, oh, maybe I need to get out of this relationship because this isn't right for me, or I can see potential signs of abuse. But even for the person who is perpetrating, like, may not even realize and kind of, have like this aha moment, like, oh my gosh, this is how I am sort of behaving in my relationships. I need to take stock of what I'm doing. Maybe I need to seek counseling or something so that, and doing that, starting that at an early age, is really important.
It is, especially in the underserved community. I feel like that's where we need to also focus on, because, like, just educate the parents for them to also see the signs if they see those in their kids. To prevent it from a young age. For sure. I mean, and so there's a couple of things there, right? Especially like in our culturally, in some of our communities, where our families may not necessarily be open to dating, and you might have parents who have teenagers, and the teenagers are dating, but they don't want to tell their parents, for fear of whatever, you can't or whatever. It's gonna happen regardless, parents.
Yeah, I mean, so and the thing is, so then those parents may not be aware of what's going on, right?
Yes.
Because those kids are like keeping
Afraid.
the fact that
Yeah.
they're even dating.
Yeah.
One thing to kind of also be aware of is like when you see signs like your child's boyfriend or girlfriend sort of asking for passwords and of their each other's accounts and social media things.
Yeah.
Like those are signs of like controlling behavior.
True.
Right.
Wow.
So.
Okay. Well, any last words that you would like to share with our listeners?
If you're in an abusive situation, or if you need someone to kind of help you through whatever situation you may be in, regarding safety, and you can call our helpline 713-981-7645. We are here to help. We do this through a culturally competent lens, different languages, and all of our services are confidential. We are here to walk you through the entire process, and so that's what we aim to do, because we just believe that everybody deserves to be able to live, in safety.
Yes, absolutely. Wow, it's been an hour.
I can't believe
Time
it.
has
Like,
flown so quickly.
I felt like there were so many more things that
Yes.
we could have just talked about. But
Yeah.
but thank you for giving Daya this platform,
Of course.
and for for us to be able to talk about like the intersections of domestic violence and gun violence. One more thing I wanted to say is, as a community, we can model appropriate behavior, right?
Yes.
We can learn about what healthy relationships look like. We can support survivors. We can, and we can also use our ability to vote, so that we have better gun laws.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here with your Chai Time Girls
Thank you.
on
Thank you.
103.5 Hum FM. It's always a pleasure having Daya and you on the show. This is, I think, our second show with
Second
with
time,
you.
yeah.
So we really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
Listeners, next week, same time, same place. We'll see you then. Thank you.